This is Lance Gordon, and this is the Ananke book recording, part 4. Remember to click on subscribe so that when I upload more, you'll be notified in the way YouTube notifies you. Okay, on to the book. All right. Chapter 2, the Logos of the Ananke. The logos of pursuing the truth. Remember, logos meant logical, moralistic thought. Let us examine the way of pursuing the truth from the viewpoint of an example. Let us review the trials and tribulations of the Wright brothers, the inventors of the airplane. The idea of flying a machine was not unique in those days, nor were the numerous attempts at conquering the sky. What was unique became known as methodological trial and error. In other words, a theory was formulated that if a bird could fly, then man could too. This rested on the faith, the postulate that an order existed, an order that would allow anything to fly as long as it conformed to and fit into the necessary design in nature. Moreover, a hypothesis was formed out of wood, canvas, and cable that suggested that it was the answer. It could fly. Needless to say, the first hypothesis failed. It didn't fly an inch. Did the Wright brothers give up? Did they throw away their entire design, their entire hypothesis? Did they claim their theory was wrong, that man could not fly? No, they did not. What did they do? They took their design, their hypothesis, and modified it. They incorporated the new knowledge, the new information, the new data that had made their flying machine fail. They did not give up merely because some new data rejected their hypothesis. They searched for a new modified one, a hypothesis that would retain the virtues of the old one while incorporating the new information, such that it would not fail due to that same information again. Well, it failed again, but not because of the same data as before, not because of the same mistakes. And so a new hypothesis was formed that incorporated the new data that had made it fail this time. On and on this, quote, trial and incorporation of error process, unquote, was painstakingly pursued. Sometimes the procedure was followed by faith alone. Maybe enough error could be incorporated so as to let the bloody thing fly a couple of feet. And so it was. Their efforts paid off. Can you imagine the feeling they must have felt, the exhilaration, the adrenaline, when they shouted, "It flies! The bloody thing flies! We were right!" How did they do it? How did they find the truth? What secret logos did they use? Theorizing, postulating, and hypothesis testing. There is no secret. The Greeks announced the logos 2,500 years ago. It can be summarized as follows. 1. Create a theory which logically seems like it can fit within the scope of Ananke. This process is called logismos, where analogy becomes a very strong tool to use. Example, in the previous paragraphs, if birds can fly, then we can too, both being under the Ananke. It is merely fitting into the dynamics of things that we lack. 2. State the postulates of this theory which every reasonable man would agree upon. Example, that mathematics and the laws of physics are correct, that the universe is, at the very least, made up of patterns that can be deciphered, that hopefully these patterns discovered by man are true for the situation at hand, that these patterns will not change by the whim of the gods. 3. Break down the theory into its fundamental hypotheses that can be tested by independent data. 4. If the hypothesis withstands 90% of the data or trials but is rejected by 10% of the data, do not remove the hypothesis as being totally false. Instead, search for a modified hypothesis that incorporates the error, the data that apparently rejected the theory. Retest the new, improved hypothesis with new data and events, thereby testing its integrity. If it fails, repeat step number 4. When all the testing is done, we would have come close to the truth. Like the Wright brothers, we merely may have flown 100 yards or so, yet we would be on the way to conquering space and the universe itself. This is the logos that I have used for the past 15 years, at least from 1985, and I've used the same thing till now, which is 2017, quite a big leap, to decode the Ananke. The original theory of the Ananke is rooted in Greek thought and indirectly in Egyptian and Hindu theology. Excuse me while I take a sip of coffee. Oh, that's good in the morning. The major hypotheses on my own announcement, 3 of which are Greek, and 1 of which is my own. The testing of these hypotheses are performed by the world data of scientific discovery, human events, and personal reflection. It's not strictly hypothesis testing, but it is showing evidence to support these conjectures. As in the tradition of the ancient Greeks, all must fit together, and contradictions to the hypotheses necessarily point to the untruths of the thought under consideration. It should be noted that although we will be able to approach the truth, we will never be able to arrive at the truth, since one can never prove a hypothesis to be true. We can only fail to reject our hypotheses time and time again. Thus, the integrity of our thoughts can be evaluated by its endurance to the world data as it appears today, and its endurance to the new discoveries, facts, and events as they appear tomorrow. The theory of the Ananke. As was stated, or at least implied, by the ancient Greeks of 2,500 years ago, the universe is composed of an order, Ananke. This Ananke is a regular rhythm which man and all the creatures and all the particles under nature can strain but can never break. We are free to choose to go with the flow of this Ananke, if there is a flow, or against it. Ananke is rational, logical, and moral as it reflects itself in human affairs, and simple. It is simple in that the particular events and particular patterns are mere subsets of a more universal, global pattern of a higher nature. This ultimate global, universal pattern can be considered the formula of the Ananke, from which all is derived by mere extension or substitution. If we knew the formula, then we could understand the flow, the direction, the way. If we knew the way, this Tao, so to speak, then our lives could improve through the sympathetic response that would occur. This response being one that would allow Ananke's orderly process to go forward, to reward the behavior with feelings of joy and an improved state of happiness. At the very least, a lack of resistance by other people and other things around you. On the other hand, going against the way would precipitate negative feelings and a lessening of our lot of happiness in this life. Lastly, and above all, it is felt that the patterns under Ananke and its ultimate formula can be found through a process of logismos, logical, moralistic thought, theorizing, combined with the necessary testing that is required, this testing and experimenting being necessary to constantly confirm the logos and its hypotheses. The postulates of Ananke, this singular order to things. The postulates that guided the author's thoughts, my thoughts, can be stated as follows. 1. Ananke is consistent in time and space, that is to say, it applied in the past in the same way as it applies now. The difference being that the particular situations in the world may change, but not in the way they respond to this order. Also, this order, being universal, should apply on Earth, as well as any other planet, solar system, or galaxy. The difference being that the particular conditions may vary, but not in the way they respond to this order, as in the verified laws of physics, that incidentally you could see operating billions of light years away, and that means billions of years in the past. 2. Ananke is universal in its application. The patterns of its behavior emanate from the same general law or formula. In other words, there is a oneness of design, purpose, and direction, as opposed to multiple purposes and directions. At least that would be preferred, depending upon what we find out. It would be very unusual, of course, to find out that it is a singular law, a singular pattern of some sort. Likelihood of that is very remote, and yet that's exactly what we're going to find out. 3. Lastly, that all the patterns within this Ananke must fit together. The patterns as a whole must explain the factual world of the past, present, and future as it comes upon us. The creation of Ananke hypotheses. It should be obvious by now that one can create hypotheses under this theory of the Ananke through various logical means. 1. We can search for sequences of events that seem to cause one another to happen. This cycle can be considered an observed pattern which must be confirmed through rigorous testing. 2. We can use analogy to get ideas as to where to look for these patterns. Analogy assumes a universal pattern or formula to exist. For example, we know by observation and hypothesis testing that the universe is composed of empty space, condensed bodies of mass, and is eternally moving and dissipating energy. By analogy, we could assume that if the macro world, the big world, behaved like this, then the analogous micro world might behave in a similar manner. This is not a guarantee. It merely suggests an approach to studying the micro world and gives us an idea of what patterns we may encounter. 3. We can see holes in our accumulation of hypotheses/patterns, thereby pointing to the direction of further research. These holes represent the missing parts that would make the story complete, such that all patterns fit together in a whole picture. This is analogous to assembling a giant jigsaw puzzle. We know it's a whole picture. This is our postulate since we bought the game from a reliable store. We attack the bottom left corner first. Beginning to see a partial picture unfold. We can almost visualize what the missing pieces look like. We frantically start searching for the missing piece of the puzzle in the world of puzzle pieces. If we don't find it now, we will at least recognize it later when we, quote, stumble upon it, unquote. In a similar manner, we can find more pieces or patterns to the puzzle called Ananke. Upon stumbling into the patterns of Ananke, we must list them down in a testable way. It must be capable of being proved wrong by external data. We should not fear being proved wrong, for like the Wright brothers, we can dust ourselves off, modify the hypothesis, and try again. In this manner, we will be able to approach the truth. It should be mentioned that we should be constantly searching for the ultimate commonalities in all things. Keeping track of time here. If we find the universal correlation, we will be piecing together the ultimate pattern of them all, the formula. This formula should be universal and should be complete as in a picture which is composed of elements, each relating to each other in a logical way. This formula, once discovered, should be rigorously tested to confirm if the observable world is explained by it. The above methodology is the process that I employed during that first 15 years, from the year 1970 to 1985. I'm happy to say that I have found a well-tested formula. It will be up to you to test it further from your unique perspective. If contradictions result, maybe we can modify the hypotheses together in order to come closer to the truth. As for now, here are the ultimate patterns of this Ananke and its ultimate formula and purpose. The 4 major hypotheses of the Ananke. The following patterns represent years of testing by observation and classification of the world data. I purposely will expose these patterns, next page, in an illogical sequence so that you can get a flavor as to the confusion that I underwent. The total picture will be explained after the presentation of the 4 patterns. The proper sequence will become clear at that time. In the next 2 chapters, I will reveal some of the testing that made me believe in this ultimate reality. This pattern, the pattern of opposites is the first one. And incidentally, you can get all of these patterns by dividing up the universe from the micro, like atomic physics, to the macro, which would be astronomy, and in between would be psychology and sociology and politics and you name it, all the stuff, chemistry, biology. You can sequence them from the very, very small operations of things in the universe to the very large, and look at the commonality between them to find these patterns really do exist. So the first one I'm announcing is the pattern of opposites. This pattern is probably the most obvious of all. Not only did the ancient Greeks believe in opposites and the consequent symmetry in some things, actually most things, but the ancient Egyptians recognized it as well. Wet and dry, hot and cold, male and female, protons and electrons, exothermic reactions and endothermic reactions. Incidentally, somebody asked me about that. Exothermic is giving off heat, and endothermic is consuming heat on the reactions in chemistry. Apparently, opposing forces are a necessity under Ananke. But why? Does everything occur in opposites? Are there only two extremes per situation? Why are some things composed of opposites when you tear them apart, as in the neutron? First of all, opposition can occur in more than two varieties. The government of the United States is composed of three opposing forces: executive, legislative, and judicial. The family unit is composed of the father, the mother, and the children, each having their own self-interests. The world is divided into numerous countries, each having their self-interest at heart. The earth is over 2 billion separately self-interested men and women. On the other hand, although two muscles may oppose each other, as in the human body, in order to create motion, they in turn are composed of millions of fibers, muscle fibers. These fibers work as if they were separate, independent muscles. They cause uniform motion only when they are all commanded by electrical impulse via our brains. Let us therefore more precisely state that the law of opposites suggests that all things and events in nature are composed of two or more opposing forces, that apparently non-conflicting events or particles are merely in balance internally, that the law of opposites could be considered the law of conflicting interests. We will return to this law later, and I purposely tried to confuse you on that as well. The pattern of change is the next law you'll see in common. At first glance, you would think I was crazy stating that an order of the universe may be change. It almost seems like an oxymoron in terms. Yet, I am not the one who thought of this pattern. It was Heraclitus of 2,500 years ago that suggested that this was in common in all things, and therefore should be considered the most dominant pattern of all. In fact, he devoted his whole life, trying to confirm this conjecture. His argument is simple. Just look around. Is not everything in a state of motion and change? As he stated, you cannot step into a river once and expect it to be the same exact river when you step in it again. Everything is in motion, and therefore changing. The atoms, the erosion of our mountains, the sun, the moon, the solar system, the universe, our lives, our physical bodies, etc. I had no choice. He was right. Everything is changing, and opposing that would be things being still. Try to find anything that is still. They thought in the past the mountains were still until they learned, no, they were changing too. It had to be one of the universal laws, this thing of change. But was this change arbitrary, or did it have purpose? Was this change really, quote, chaos, or was it guided motion? Was there purpose behind the apparent explosions and chance in nature? Is chance really chaos, or is it order in disguise? Was change always bad, or could it be good as well? And so we come to stating the second law. There exists a universal pattern under Ananke called change. This change can be negative or positive depending on your perspective. And once again, I'm not giving you the complete story. I'm trying to confuse you to show you how hard this was to figure out. The pattern of balance and harmony. After convincing you of the last one, you really must be confused when I announce this one. After all, isn't this contradictory to change? How can two contradictory things be in the same thing? If you recall, the law of opposites allows for contradictory things to be present in the same thing. You can have opposites in the same thing as long as they are in balance, right? Now that I've had fun confusing you even more, allow me to make it clear. Let us not worry how it all ties together, at least not at this point. It'll be soon enough that you'll be exposed to the entire picture. Let us be concerned with the concept only. Is it true or is it not true? As early as 2,500 years ago, the Greeks realized that all was in a state of balance or tending towards this state of balance. That is to say, Dike, the moralistic balance of things, was a dominant pattern in the universe. All particle behavior tends towards equilibrium. All human nature tries to organize societies that are at peace. The nations of the world talk peace at the very least. The human flesh and organs tend to homeostasis, a balance of the chemical and physical properties of the body. The human spirit wants peace of mind. The animal kingdom lives in an apparent delicate balance with nature and its forces. We are trying to live in balance with our environment. Can there be any doubt as to the validity of this reality? Let us restate this pattern more precisely as the, quote, tendency towards balance and harmony. You see, it may not be the case that the situation is in balance, but I can guarantee you that the forces that be are making the situation go into balance eventually. Of course, they may miss, and may be there only for an instant and then be out of balance, but it's trying to go in that direction. So that's why it's the tendency towards balance and harmony. Even war comes to an end with the victor establishing peace throughout his empire. The balance seems to be maintained by the opposing forces of the situation. The world is in a state of peace due to a balance of force. When an imbalance occurs, war results. Before we link this appealing story together, there is one more pattern to be discussed, the pattern of efficiency. The pattern of efficiency. I cannot give credit to the Greeks for this one. I found it myself through an unusual set of events. I will try to convey the logic as follows. For many years, I was a sales representative for some of the major computer firms in this country. I had the task of finding business and making that business happen in the light of two rather formidable bureaucracies. It is one thing working in a bureaucracy. That is hard enough. To make things happen in one can turn your brown hair white, gray, and purple at the same time. To make things happen in two, the customers and my own, was nearly impossible without throwing a couple of tantrums. It was within this situation that I began to question the nature of making things happen when dealing with humans without giving me an ulcer at the same time. I read every book imaginable on positive thinking. It didn't work. Sure, everybody liked me, but they wouldn't help me. I guess they didn't like me enough. I bought candy and flowers for everyone. I searched for sincere compliments in order to make people a little happier in their day. You name it, I did it. Did it work? Not on your life. They all took the goodies and threw me back a doggy bone of cooperation. Great return on investment, wouldn't you say? However, this made me think, if being myself and blowing up at people didn't work, that is to say, it gave me an ulcer, and if being positive didn't work, that is to say, I became Mr. Popular with less money, less time, and no cooperation anyway, then maybe some process in between would work. Perhaps a least negative due process should be tried. Perhaps by being negative in 3 sequential stages, I could have the best of both worlds. Stage 1 was gently saying no, or that is not acceptable to the individual involved. Stage 2 was contacting the supervisor with the employee's permission and awareness. Stage 3 was shooting everyone in sight until I got the job done. This worked fairly well. I got the job done with the least amount of ulcers and everyone still liked me. As this process began to work in all dimensions of my life, I began to think. I realized that I was making things happen in a least negative way, in a least energy way, in a most efficient way for the situation under attack. I realized that life is composed of many conflicts and disturbances, that each one should be treated in a least negative, most efficient, least costly manner. I then reflected on the physical world where particles are constantly being disturbed as well. Did they react in a least energy, most efficient manner? Yes, they did. Orbits of planets are elliptical and not circular because it uses less energy that way. Things gradually, if at all possible, arrive at equilibrium. With respect to society, the police force is prosecuted if they overreact to a situation. They are taught to handle all situations in a graduated negative manner, elevating the negativism only when necessary. War is used only as a last resort to settling differences. Bureaucracies reward those who are tolerant and try to treat their workers in a least negative, fair manner, lest they revolt and strike. Is not the system of justice simply a least negative way to obtain the equilibrium of a situation again? And if the least negative way in human affairs is one of the ultimate patterns of Ananke, should it not be rewarded? Should justice be held as one of the highest patterns, since it is the expression of this law? You bet it is. The Egyptians felt this, and they were right. We in this country hold justice as sacred, and we are right. As long as justice prevails, our country is safe. It is when justice falters that all civilizations die, get invaded, and change. And so we have the fourth and final pattern, the pattern of efficiency, the least energy way to get back to balance, to get back to equilibrium. It is the least costly way in material dollars and labor time. It is the least negative way in the interaction among the people in the animal kingdom. It is the way of justice. The formula of the Ananke. At this point, let us review the four hypotheses, patterns of Ananke. 1, the law of opposing forces. 2, the law of positive and negative change. 3, the law of balance and harmony. 4, the law of efficiency and least destruction. I ask the following question: is there a priority to this list? Is there a primary law that can stand alone without the need of the other laws? Think a minute before reading on. I'm not going to do a minute there, but you can do that another time. You can put it on pause. Let us analyze it in the following manner. Can opposing forces exist without the other three laws? Now, I don't go into all the details that people complain, but think about that first. I come to the conclusion that it cannot. Can change exist without the other three? Again, I could go on for 2 pages on that, and I'm not going to bore everybody, but you can think about that and discuss it. And I said change could perhaps happen alone. Can balance exist without the others? Again, you can visualize balance without perhaps the others. Can efficiency exist without the other three? I don't know. I think not. We have, therefore, and we narrow it down to 2, the law of positive and negative change and the law of balance and harmony. Not the greatest analysis, but you can do that separately. It's not a big thing to discuss and think about. But notice the law of change has a property of being negative and positive. Negative and positive to what? Negative and positive to the direction of equilibrium. That is to say, negative change is always from equilibrium and positive change is towards equilibrium. Thus, change cannot exist by itself since it interacts with the ideal, steady state, balance and harmony situation in nature. Therefore, the primary pattern of the 4 that can stand alone becomes the law of balance and harmony. The pattern of balance and harmony is the primary directive, the primary purpose, perhaps the primary thought in the universe under Ananke. As the universe expands and changes, this balance is disturbed. Thus, change, a function of the eternal motion of the universe, upsets the balance of things. Opposing forces to this change are activated in order to control the change, thereby creating a balanced situation again. The opposing forces accomplish this task in a least energy, most efficient manner, the process back to balance being considered positive change. Finally, the steady state picture is one of bounded chaos, which is allowed to undulate within a limited sphere of influence. This dynamic elemental pattern slowly loses energy to the universe until equilibrium, balance, harmony, and peace is achieved. This steady state picture is manifested in all things. The fundamental difference is the time taken to get back to equilibrium. Some events take billions of years for the cycle to be complete, while others may take microseconds to achieve peace, tranquility, and harmony. I cannot overemphasize to you the thrill it was to discover not only the fourfold pattern to things, but the fact that these patterns converge to a single logos. The single moralistic logical thought is the major directive of peace. Peace in particle behavior, peace in animal behavior, peace in human behavior, peace in planetary behavior, and peace of mind. The purpose is clear and unrelenting. We can go with the order and enjoy the fruits of the earth, or we can go against it and eat the bitter herbs that we so justly would have deserved. The choice is ours. On the positive side, Ananke, in a way of speaking, personifying it, which is not really appropriate, wants peace, balance, equilibrium, and harmony. It will help us sympathetically. The sympathetic response being one that would allow Ananke's orderly process to go forward to reward the proper behavior with feelings of joy and an improved state of happiness. Happiness for all or sadness for all. The choice is ours. As a last point, I am not suggesting yet that an associated spirit or consciousness may need to exist with this order. My logic was independent of the existence of God. In the following chapters, we will be verifying these patterns, so that beyond a shadow of a doubt, we will believe in this Ananke, this singular order, and its singular purpose. Then and only then will we address the issue of a supreme being. One last thing. Can change and destruction be the final destiny? Even though we have spoken about negative and positive change, it is quite apparent that we can still visualize a universe full of perpetual chaos. The question therefore begs itself, can change, chaos, and perpetual destruction be the final destiny? The only reasonable response could be that perhaps it can. At some remote time in the universal process of expansion and contraction, if there is a contraction, they've changed their minds in the last 20 years, we may enter a period of necessary destruction, a Shiva phase, as the Hindus would put it. As for now, we have abundant evidence that the universe is expanding and slowing down. It is slowly losing motion and kinetic energy. States of higher chaos, such as gases, are condensing and forming stars and planets. Stars are losing energy in a slow and gradual manner, eventually collapsing into extremely dense states of non-chaotic substance. As for the human psyche, we tend to want peace and harmony at the very least for ourselves individually. We tend not to commit suicide at the drop of a hat. We endure all kinds of pain and still wish to live and multiply to the tune of over 2 billion people. I guess it's maybe 4 by now. So my ultimate conclusion is that we are in a phase of the universe where the dominant directive is the tendency towards peace and balance for all things. I also believe that billions of years from now, the primary directive could change, perhaps during the contraction phase of the universe, if it does contract, as in the Big Bang Theory, which they keep changing one way or the other with dark matter and the like, so that's a big question mark there. The primary directive could be stated as the tendency for chaos in all things. That could happen. Although it would be intriguing to write about such a universe, it is not the purpose of this book to conjecture billions of years from now. My purpose is clear, to express the relationship in Ananke as it applies to us now. And at this point, I'll stop part 4 because we're getting a little long on the time. So, let me see where we are. We're over here at 32 minutes. That's good enough. So I'll see you next time for part 5, and we'll be continuing in this chapter.